Dirtle Magic. Hello and welcome back. You can follow our post on Twitter and Facebook at DirtleMTG to stay up to date on our latest videos and other posts, and you can join a more robust discussion about Casual Commander at our blog, thedicebag.blog. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this content to help the channel and the blog grow. Another way you can support the channel, though, is through our affiliate links in the description below. If you're looking for single sealed product or gaming accessories to protect all of that glory, please consider clicking the links in the description. Now, grab some spells, it's time to dirtle. Hello. Today we stand for the greater good, even if we stand alone with Livio, Oathsworn Sentinel. Prowling around the table to threaten us are Tergrid, Jeleva, and Shorikai the Genesis Engine. The Tergrid player wins the die roll and begins the game with a swamp. Jeleva drops a mirror pool. Shorikai drops an island into play. I draw plains, and play a plains, going last unfortunately. The Frightful One drops another swamp, and then casts Sign in Blood to draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. They discard a Massacre Worm from their hand at the end of the turn, which is probably a pretty good reanimation target. The Scourge plays a mountain, and they cast Demir Signet. An island enters for the Shorikai player, and then they cast Ethereum Sculptor. I draw another plains, and play Castle Ardenvale. A swamp enters the field for the Tergrid player. They cast Liliana, Heretical Healer, and pass. Jeleva drops an island, and they cast their commander, the Scourge of Nephalia. When it hits the field, it exiles Unearth and Fabricate off the top of everyone's decks. 2 the Genesis Engine, and an island lands on the table. Gold Mirror is cast, and that is followed by Sky Diamond. Sunblast Angel comes to me, and I drop a plains. With nothing really to play this turn, I pass. Another swamp for the Frightful One. Grave Pact is then cast, and I become leery about summoning too much to the battlefield. Dragon Skull Summit erupts onto the field for the Jeleva player. They move to combat, but in response at the beginning of combat, the Shorikai player casts High Speed Hoverbike. When it comes into play, it taps down Jeleva to prevent her from attacking. In the second main, the Jeleva player casts the Choir, targeting the Shorikai player's deck. This allows them to grab any artifact from within, and they decide on Esper Sentinel. 2 Shorikai's turn proper, and their commander hits the stack. Esper Sentinel also triggers, but they pay the 1 to keep the Jeleva player from drawing a card. Afterward, they cast Reality Shift to banish the Esper Sentinel. A Charming Prince comes to visit me on my turn. I drop a plains, and cast the creature. I scry 2, putting both the Sad Robot and the War Priest of Thune back on top. I pass afterward. Tergrid casts a Dread Presence on their turn. Jeleva's turn sees another island into play, and they move immediately to combat. The commander is assigned into me, and she triggers. That player casts Fabricate from exile, grabbing a Panharmonicon from their deck and putting it into their hand. I take 1 damage, going down to 39 and up to 1 commander. In the second main, Jeleva casts Overflowing Chalice, which is kicked 3 times, and follows it up with a Chrome Mox. An Ashiok Planeswalker is exiled under it, and the Panharmonicon is then cast. 2 Shorikai, and the engine is activated to make a pilot, draw them 2 cards, and have them discard 1 card. Solemn Simulacrum comes to my hand, and I drop a Crystal Vein. I cast the Sad Robot, and grab a plains from my deck into play tap. I pass, waiting for my next turn to cast a big creature. Tergrid begins their turn with an Animate Dead targeting the Massacre Worm. This is countered by a counterspell out of the Shorikai player. That was a close one. Over to Jeleva, and Temple of Malice hits the field, allowing the Scry of 1. They pass with no attacks. Shorikai drops an Iganjo Seat of the Empire on their turn. They then cast Manifold Key, and activate Shorikai for more pilots and looting. Mox Opal comes into play for them, and Manifold Key is activated to untap Shorikai. Oketra's Monument enters my hand for the draw, and I drop a plains. I cast Livio from the command zone. I pass, leaving mana up for his activated ability to exile my creatures with Aegis counters on them if necessary. Tergrid makes a Dark Deal on their turn, and all hands are discarded. We each draw cards equal to the number we had, -1, and I gain Austere Command, a Plains, Angel of Sanctions, and Suture Priest. Jeleva's turn comes and goes with no actions taken by the player. Shorikai visits an Ancient Den on their turn. The engine is activated for more pilots and looting, and Cyberdrive Awakener is cast. When it enters, it animates all of their non-creature artifacts into creatures, and things become very dangerous indeed. Manifold Key is used to untap the Genesis engine, and they pass without attacks. I draw plains and drop it to the table. I then activate Livio twice, exiling my Charming Prince and Sad Robot, expecting a board wipe soon, and pocketing them in a safe dimension. I pass. 2 Tergrid and Phyrexian Obliterator hits the field. Noticeably, there is no land drop. Jeleva's turn sees just a command tower. 2 Shorikai and a Prey Stream meanders onto the field. The Genesis engine is activated, granting another pilot and some more looting. It's then untapped via the Manifold Key, and Master of Ethereum comes down afterward. At the end of the turn, I activate Livio's second ability to bring back the Prince and the Robot. They each trigger, and I re-exile the Robot with the Prince, and grab a Plains from my deck into play tapped. To my turn proper, and I gain a Flicker Wisp. I drop a Plains and then cast the creature. When it enters, I exile Livio, but in response to that trigger, I use Livio to exile my 2 other creatures. My board cleared out, I then cast Touch a Priest for some life gain. At the end of the turn, I get a sad Robot back, gaining another land, 2 total life, and Livio returns to the field. 2 Tergrid, and Necromancy is conjured. My Mirror Battlesphere is forced back from its rest, and the Searcher Priest triggers, draining the Tergrid player for 5 total life after all the Mirror come into play. Tergrid passes without attacks. Jeleva's turn sees them cast Sadistic Sacrament, kicked targeting me. They go through my deck and exile 15 cards of their choice. How rude! Shorikai begins their turn with a Plains into play. They then do the Dance of the Loots, and a pilot joins in for the tango. They lose 1 life from the Suture Priest, and Shorikai revs up again thanks to the Manifold Key. Mirror Box then hits the field, and I wonder what the purpose in the deck is. Shorikai is crewed, and they move to combat. They swing with their commander and the Awakener into the Tergrid player, and the Master of Ethereum into the Jeleva player. Jeleva blocks their attacker, and the Tergrid player goes down to 18. A white main lion flashes into my hand on my turn. I ponder if I should now use the austere command I've been holding onto, and decide to do so. I cast the white main lion, gaining 1 life and advancing Livio back to my hand. In response to these triggers, I activate Livio to exile the Suture Priest with an Aegeus counter. With some of my creatures safe, namely my commander, I then cast Austere Command, choosing to destroy all artifacts and creatures with mana value 4 or greater. Before the wipe can resolve though, the Shorikai player quits the game in response. The wipe then resolves, and a number of triggers hit the stack. Liliana flips over into her Planeswalker form while creating a zombie token. I sacrifice the lion, and the Manifest token goes away, and I get to draw a card, which is a Plains. I drop the Plains, and recast Livio. Over to Tergrid, and Liliana is activated for each of us to discard a card. Dread Return is cast, and a Sepulchral Primordial comes into play. From the graveyards, it takes only a Solemn Simulacrum, and that gets them a swamp on the ETB. They move to attacks, swinging the zombie token at the Jeleva player for 2, and it connects, bringing them down to 38. Jeleva's turn sees the recasting of their commander, and she exiles Read the Bones, Extract, and Desertion when she comes into play. I get away for his bubble on my turn, and that isn't very helpful at all. I activate Livio to return my pocketed creatures, and I gain 2 life, re-exile the Flickering Wisp with the Prince, and blink steal back my sad robot with the Wisp trigger. I then embalm the Angel of Sanctions, gaining 1 more life and exiling under it the Primordial. I go ahead and play the bauble, and pass with mana up for either it or Livio activations. At the end of the turn, my Flicker Wisp comes back into play, and I blink the zombie token away to expose Liliana to attacks. Said robot also comes back from exile, and I gain another Plains and more life. Tergrid recast their commander to the table, and they lose 1 life. Liliana's -X is activated where X equals 3 to return a Demon's Disciple to play. This forces each player to sacrifice a creature, and I sacrifice the sad robot, drawing me a Gauntlet of Power. Jeleva just goes back to the command zone. Tergrid triggers along with the Grave Pact, and returns my sad robot to the battlefield under their control, and I have to sacrifice another creature. I choose the Prince, and he hits the bin, and Tergrid gets him to their side of the battlefield. They choose to gain 3 life, and I drain a total of 2, so they net gain 1 life. Dread Return is then cast with the Tergrid player sacrificing all the creatures they control, triggering the Pact, and I use Livio in response to exile my Flicker Wisp, hoping to use it to return to the battlefield whatever they might steal with that Primordial they'll be getting back. I sacrifice the rest of my creatures, and once the Primordial comes back into play, it nabs the Mirror Battlesphere from my graveyard. Dread Return then resolves, and it brings back the Massacre Worm. Moving to Jeleva, they cast Preordain, scrying 2 and drawing 1. Life's Finale is then cast, and the board is wiped of its creatures. No creatures are put into Tergrid's graveyard by the Jeleva player, which I feel is a pretty good move. My turn gives me a Plains, and I drop it to the table. I sacrifice the Crystal Vein, and use that mana and more to cast the Gauntlet of Power, choosing white. I then recast Livio, and sacrifice the Bauble for a Plains into the battlefield tap. I activate the Castle Ardenvale for a token, and pass the turn. Tergrid activates Liliana to have each player discard a card, and I feel nothing. Jeleva discards a Commandeer, however. The Jukabog then comes down for that player, and the Jeleva player's graveyard takes a trip into the void. Tergrid is then recast, and they pass the turn. Jeleva's turn sees Diluvian Primordial hit the stack. When it enters the battlefield, they cast Delirium Screens and Austere Command from their opponent's graveyards. They decide to stack it where Austere Command resolves first, and the board is wiped of its creatures and enchantments. With Delirium Screens on the stack, the Tergrid player decides to quit the game. Moving to me, I draw Pilgrim's Eye. I cast it and grab yet another Plains from my deck. I play that new Plains, and create another human token with Castle Ardenvale. Going to combat, I swing the available token into the Jeleva player, dealing 2 and dropping them to 36. It's going to be a slow grind. Back to Jeleva, and they cast their commander. She enters, exiling a number of blue cards. At the end of the turn, I activate Livio to bring back the exiled Flicker Wisp with the Aegis counter, and use its ETB to exile Jeleva. With that play though, the Jeleva player quits the game as well. Good game to my opponents. I don't know if this gets through in the recording, but that was a long game. Had to be very patient with Livio. Tergrid always causes me to play much more conservatively, and luckily the blink strategy works fairly well against Tergrid decks. However, that player also not dropping a land for a long time also helped us out. Beyond that, this deck did run into a few hiccups that I hopefully ironed out after the fact, but it still needs some work. If you want to see a slightly updated list, there's a link in the description below if you want to check it out. Thank you for tuning in to another Casual Commander game here on Dirtle Magic. Until next time, stay safe out there.